First thing to note is that this session is very kindly sponsored by the Federalist Society of Law and Public Policy Studies. They have very kindly dedicated the time and generosity to help us promote debate over English legal freedoms, including the one we'll be discussing this evening. This evening, yes, thank you. This evening we're debating, or at least discussing, a case of acute injustice. A case of injustice relating to the European Arrest Warrant, the Romanian government, and our UK legal situation, currently within the European Union, signed up to the EAW. We're also discussing an acute case of injustice with regards to Alexander Adamescu and his father. We're very delighted in a way to have Mr. Adamescu here, along with Professor Tim Evans, a scholarly professor at Middlesex University in the Business and Economics Department, who has friends in the audience and has spoken on the issues of civil liberties and these sorts of matters at many other venues. I don't want to take too much time away from Alexander's case, and so, if I may, just introduce to you Mr. Adamescu.
Actually, I'm going to speak first, if that's okay.
In that case, Mr. Tim Evans, indeed, Professor Tim Evans.
Thank you very much indeed, Rory, and indeed Simon. Thank you so much for inviting me here this evening to speak to all of you. Just over 25 years ago, I was in the very privileged position of being the head of the Prime Minister's Policy Unit in the Slovak Republic in the former Czechoslovakia. I was very privileged then because I was in my mid to late 20s, and there I was, leading a policy unit, taking a country in the former Soviet bloc, a country that had been very sadly, formerly a Stalinist tyranny, to some semblance of freedom, democracy, and rule of law. When I lived in that country, when I lived in Eastern and Central Europe, just over a quarter of a century ago, I did not expect that all these years later I would be here this evening with you, or giving the talk that I'm just about to give. And it's with a heavy heart that I have to say and report the things that I'm going to report. Last summer, the chief correspondent of Sky News, a Mr. Stuart Ramsey, a highly awarded and highly respected British journalist, did an investigative study. And his study concerned, as I understand it, gun running, illegal arms trading across Romania. If you're in a mature country that understands the importance of openness and transparency and the rule of law, and an investigation has been done like that, that has found something inappropriate going on, a mature government would say, that's terrible, that's bad news. They'd want to investigate it and get to grips with the problem. But instead of that, Romania launched a legal process against the journalist, starting to attack, in effect, his right to free speech. And that process continues. There was a very good article by the former research director of the Fabian Society, someone who has probably very different political views to many people in this room, a gentleman called Stephen Pollard, who again is one of Britain's better known national journalists, currently the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, but who's written for many, many newspapers, national newspapers over the years, and again is a very well-respected British journalist. And in an article he wrote for The Spectator at some point last year, it might have been September, I can't remember, he pointed out that it's inappropriate for other governments to attack or indeed to use the threat of law against what is ultimately quite positive and ultimately helpful forms of investigative journalism. One of the really shocking things about Stephen's article in The Spectator was that he pointed out that he, as editor of the Jewish Chronicle, sometimes comes under attack from governments in Eastern Europe when certain facts of history or simply geographical facts are pointed out. So, for example, he explained that the government of Poland attack him when he simply points out that by a cruel fate of history, the former concentration camp Auschwitz was indeed on what we regard today to be Polish.
Yes.
Right. Highly respected journalist who is attacked and criticised for talking about geographical and historical fact. Now, I didn't expect, as I said earlier, to be 25 years on from my time in Eastern Europe and to be reading this kind of material. A few weeks ago, there was the most extraordinary article. It was more than half a page, and it was the leading opinion editorial in the Times. It was by their diplomatic correspondent or editor, a man called Roger Boyes. And he's a very long-standing journalist. I think he's been around actually on the Times and in the national press for many decades now. He's certainly one of Britain's longest-standing and most experienced diplomatic editors. And in his article, he reported that within Romania, you in effect have not only an extremely powerful and somewhat corrupt domestic intelligence service called the SRI, the natural inheritor of the former Ceausescu Securitate, but that they have a national anti-crime agency, the so-called, or an anti-corruption directorate called the DNA, which is in effect far from fighting corruption, is, according to Roger Boyes, somehow itself deeply involved in corruption and works very closely with what is now this highly corrupt and malevolent domestic intelligence service. Now, you might think that that doesn't have much consequence until you come to understand how European arrest warrants work. Because the reality is, under the current EAW system, any foreign government in Europe that has signed up to this can point a finger at any of you, and providing they have filled in the paperwork correctly, a British judge has to send you to that country. In fact, a British judge is not allowed to look at any of the evidence. Geopolitically, the danger of having the EAW system and of having a British government treat with equivalence and reciprocity all other legal systems. The danger is that this will incentivize not only all manner of illegality, criminality, and bogus, and I choose my words wisely, lawfare. You all know about warfare, but lawfare. What happens if states, and they're here today, gone tomorrow, political leaders, start under the seemingly nebulous veneer of extradition? What happens if politicians start to point the finger at journalists elsewhere they don't like? What happens if politicians, political classes, start to see what sort of elbow room they can get, and who can they pick off, who can they lift off the streets, or who can they threaten and silence? When you look at the material of the former Foreign Secretary, Robin Cook, the Labour Foreign Secretary, Robin Cook, his former Special Advisor's recent report, a man called David Clark, who is an eminent scholar and researcher and an expert on Eastern Central Europe, when you read his recent report by the Henry Jackson Society, that was widely reported in The Guardian and the New Statesman, it was, I think, mentioned in the Financial Times and elsewhere. And again, it is a forensic analysis of the current deep state within Romania. When you read that material, you start to realise why it is wholly inappropriate and it is inconsonant with the sort of rule of law that we luxuriate in here. It is wholly inappropriate that we, as beacons of liberty and dignity and human rights, should be treating such systems with equivalence and reciprocity. What we should be doing is reforming the EAW system, ensuring that British judges can actually look at the evidence, and to maintain the rule of law, they should be able to judge whether cases are appropriate or are indeed political and weaponized charges that have no real substance or evidence behind them. What you're going to hear now from Mr. Alexander Adamescu is a woeful tale. And it's not only a sad tale, but it's also, I think, a call to arms for people right across the political spectrum. Be it people on the centre-right, or people in the Lib Dems, or people on the Labour left, think tanks, the Fabian societal left, whoever. It is a call to arms to make sure that this sort of lawfare does not progress, and for us to stand up for basic human rights, basic freedoms, basic due process, but also, importantly, to stand united across the political spectrum. That's very important, because actually what you're going to hear isn't something that will just chime with people on the right. It will resonate with all the friends and maybe elements of your distant families who vote differently. It's very moving. It can be quite upsetting, this story. But it's very important because it's a call to arms. And the bottom line is, and my concluding point is, we can and we must do better. When I was the advisor to the Prime Minister in Slovakia, I think I thought that totalitarian communism had gone. We were seeing the age of the internet, the beginning of cheap flights, that we would all unite in freedom, democracy. There would be disagreements, but off we would go. What I did not imagine was the way in which, in some countries, not many in Eastern Europe, but a few, those tentacles of the old regime would linger and go on, and would sully the democracy and freedoms, not least of their own populations. So brace yourself for quite a story. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Alexander Adamescu.
Thank you, Tim, for the introduction, and I would like to thank Rory and Simon for the invitation tonight. My name is Alexander Adamescu. I'm 38 years old. I'm a German national, and I've been living in London since 2012 with my wife and my 3 small children. I've been arrested on the 14th of June 2016 at the Frontline Club, where I was due to speak on a panel with a few other journalists, Peter Oborn of the Daily Mail and Joseph Sternberg of the Wall Street Journal, precisely about what I want to talk to you about tonight, and that is the abuse of the European Arrest Warrant. I don't know if I have to explain, but I'd like to say a few words about the European Arrest Warrant. It was largely implemented following the 9/11 attacks in Europe as a means to speed up and streamline the extradition process for those accused of serious crime. The aim of the EAW was to introduce a system of surrender between member states in the European Union without having to prove a prima facie case, without even having to prove the evidence on which the charge and conviction was based. It's widely known that Theresa May has consistently praised the EAW in her time as Home Secretary, and Eva Ranta followed now, has been praising it as well. I want to tell you a case, my case and my father's case, that show why it is not a good idea and it has to be reformed, and it can't go on like this, because it has very grave implications. The story starts with my father, Dan Adamescu. He was a businessman born in Romania. He emigrated to Germany, where he was very successful in real estate. And then he returned to Romania in the 90s, where he supported a centre-right newspaper called Romania Libera. And that newspaper fought very much for Romania's democratization, the elimination of the old communist networks, and the rule of law. That was something that, I have to say now, cost my father his life. And I want to read to you what then Prime Minister Victor Ponta said 2 years ago. I can get my page right here. On the 24th of May 2014, Romania's then Social Democrat Prime Minister Victor Ponta appeared on primetime TV and said the following about my father. Mr. Adamescu publishes a newspaper that strongly campaigns against corruption. But I think that this man who presents himself as a publisher, who speaks about the fight against corruption, has himself led a network of corruption to great effect over a period of many years. And I'm convinced that we will shortly be hearing more things about this from the State Prosecutor's Office. Barely 10 days later, my father was arrested by a squadron of masked anti-terror police, paraded in handcuffs in front of TV cameras, brandished as a criminal on TV, and brought in front of a judge who refused bail because he was a German national, wealthy, and granting him bail would lead to a negative public reaction. Reams of pages from the indictment were published in the media in the same time. My father was convicted on day 1 of his trial. He was denied bail on subsequent hearings because, and I quote from the judgment, he continues to deny the accusations against him. He was finally convicted to 4 years and 4 months in a very swift show trial. My father, 68 years old and already ill at the beginning of the trial, was then denied adequate medical treatment during his pre-trial detention and post-conviction incarceration. He was denied medication for 37 days. He was not allowed to have a knee surgery. While he was still walking to the courts in 2014, he ended up in a wheelchair in 2015. He collapsed in prison in September 2016, was revived in an emergency hospital and brought straight back to prison. He was denied parole in 2016 on 3 consecutive times on the grounds that his illnesses were no reason for his early release and that he had to spend more time in prison. A couple of days after the last denial, he contracted septicemia, and while he was fighting for his life in hospital, the Romanian prosecutor argued that he didn't believe a word about Dan Adamescu's medical condition. And my father proved him wrong, and he died a few days later on the 23rd of January 2017. This is something that is happening right now, right here in the European Union. This is happening in Romania, a country with the UK is sharing full mutual recognition of judicial judgments and acts. It is British judges have full confidence in Romania Romania is a country of good faith that is leading proper investigations and prosecutions, and that are handling their cases exactly like the UK would. This is the theory. Since 2014, I've been fighting for justice for my father and trying to explain that this assumption of reciprocity and equality is not the reality. I have used every forum I could to try and expose Romania, what it is doing, to my father, but to also a lot of people, other people in Romania. And what is all couched in these very nice terms of the anti-corruption fight. The backlash against me started last year when Romania had enough. In March 2016, almost 2 years after the investigation had started against my father, Romania's chief prosecutor appeared live on TV, similar to Victor Ponta in 2014, and requested my arrest before the nation for exactly the same accusations and on the basis of exactly the same evidence that my father had been convicted for, and accused me of evading justice in Romania while I had been living with my partner, my 3 children in London since 2012. My first Romanian arrest warrant was issued on 4th of May and then cancelled on the 9th of May 2016. But then I received a second arrest warrant on the same day within a few hours. The judge on the case was not chosen randomly from a set of judges, as Romanian law requires. He had been handpicked. The judge then summoned me to appear in court within half an hour in Bucharest. The court backdated a document in order to appear that I had been given 2 hours to appear in court. And after the very short hearing, it took the judge exactly 20 minutes to read the 37 arch-level files in my case, to deliberate on the pleadings of the party, to write down his judgment, and send the arrest warrant to the police. Only an hour later, it was leaked to Romanian media. My EAW was issued on the basis of this Romanian arrest warrant, and as I said, I was picked up on the 14th of June at the Frontline Club by a British police officer who, from the Met in London, who had been instructed by the Romanian embassy that I was to be found at the Frontline Club and that I had to be arrested immediately because I was a very dangerous Romanian criminal. The problem obviously is that all of these facts that I've been telling you about are of no help to me at my hearing in Westminster Magistrates Court in April. Judge Zani is not allowed to take into consideration the lack of evidence, the fact that my father was killed by Romania, that my case is actually his case, rewarmed, and that the whole arrest warrant underlying the AW is illegal even to Romanian law. He can't dismiss the case, it's ever been judged, and he can't discharge the AW of a flawed national arrest warrant. Mr. Evans, Tim has spoken to you about the state of democracy in Romania. There is an SRI, intelligence service, who has infiltrated major parts of Romanian civil life. We have got a general from the SRI on record saying that for them the judiciary is a tactical field of intervention. We have got a National Anti-Corruption Authority Directorate that is widely praised and supported by the West because corruption in Romania has to be eradicated. That has gone out of control and that is investigating anybody that has come on their target lists. The conviction rate of that DNA is at 92%, which I think says all about the independence of those cases and the independence of the judges who are judging, who are sitting in these courts. And because of the general assumption, the political context, very little is being done about it. On the contrary, Romania is getting praise. And these judges and these prosecutors are being applauded around the world for the fantastic work they're doing and for the very good results they're getting. And that lots of important people like Dan Adamescu have been brought to task and have paid for the very egregious crimes that they have done. The reality is very different on the ground. Romania wants to, or let's say very clever, smart people in the Romanian government and state want to lay their hands on the businesses that my father has built. I am his only son, I am his only heir, and I am the last obstacle for them to succeed and to raid the assets that my father has built. Romania is using the European Arrest Warrant in order to achieve this goal. It's very easy, but I'm going to be in April in the court. All the burden of proof rely on my shoulders, not on Romania's. Romania's words are taken for granted. Romania's ERW is genuine. I have to show the court what has happened, why my father has died, and why this is not a genuine case, but a political persecution. But it's very, very difficult. It is almost impossible to argue political motivation in a European Arrest Warrant, because the assumption is there are no political cases in Europe. They don't exist. They can't exist. Because Romania is a democracy on a par with the UK, with Germany, or with France. So it's very, very difficult for a judge to take that decision, because the assumption is it isn't. The upshot of this is that the United Kingdom, by keeping this instrument that is completely flawed in its arsenal, and this is the Home Secretary now saying they want to continue it, is becoming complicit in the political persecution. The British police force, the judiciary, the Home Office, the CPS, every one of these government institutions in Britain is now doing a tiny bit to implement an arrest warrant that would not even be dreamt of in the UK itself. And I don't think that is right, and I don't think that should continue. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Alexander and Professor Evans, for that. We have a very short time for questions, if there are any from the floor. Mr. Newark, in the front.
So basically, if this court decision goes against you in April, you will be whisked off to Romania and end up in a dire situation there. I mean, that's what we're talking about, isn't it?
Yes.
It's as simple as that. So we have to keep our fingers crossed and do all we can in the media to get that story out there. It's as simple as that.
That's correct. And the reality is that I read what was in effect the last testimony of Alexander's father. I read in detail the squalor in which he'd been kept, the rats, the unbelievable toilet facilities, the denial of medical facilities and treatment. I'm mindful that a little while ago, not long ago, a Romanian Justice Minister went to Brussels. Many people in Brussels are very well aware of the appalling conditions in the Romanian prison system. Many people in Brussels are aware. And Romania have found it quite difficult, actually, dealing with that situation. They've been under real pressure on the international stage. So a Romanian Justice Minister, not that long ago, went to Brussels and promised hundreds of millions of euros of investment in the building of several new prisons to ease the system. It was a great shame that that minister went back and was recorded in Bucharest as saying, I've just been to Brussels and I've just lied to them, told them we're going to build no more, 100, and we're not. Don't have the money. And what's astonishing is when you actually look at the number of cases from Romania, from Bulgaria and other parts of Eastern Europe. In many ways, Romania is the worst. And British courts, including the High Court, have demanded assurances of Romania. Romania says, oh yes, we'll comply. And then they don't. But time and time again, assurances are made, or assurances are given. And we believe them. Well, you can do that. You can do that half a dozen times, you can do it a dozen times. You get to a point where you no longer believe. And it was very interesting when Alexander's father died, just a few weeks ago, this year. A former president of Romania, a former head of state, declared it for what he believed it to be, and he called it murder, state murder. He was neglected in an abysmal way. And I think the great fear for people who know this case and who know Alexander is that if he goes, the great fear is, will he come out?
We'll take both questions at the same time, if we may. John, and then...
John Strafford. Time is running out, and the question is, what can we here do? Well, we've all got websites, we've all got Facebook accounts and Twitter accounts. If you could give us a short summary of this case, then we can flood the internet with all these views, and the only thing that will make government move is the glare of publicity on the case. And so I would suggest if you could do this.
So I can answer you head on, and please everyone make notes of this. There is a website. It is called Friends of Alexander Adamescu. It has on it a petition. Please sign it. There are many videos and films on there. There are over 90 major press and media hits, as I understand it, just from recent months. Yeah? Please reach out to your members of Parliament, write to number 10 Downing Street, Prime Minister, blog about this. If you know journalists, I know there are a number of journalists in this room, please tell them. There's a phone number on that website. Alexander's very accessible. He will talk to journalists, brief them, etc. So the good news for you, sir, is that the tools are in place.
Great.
The website, the phone numbers, the resources are there. You don't need to go and explain to family members because you can get the video of it, let them watch it. You don't need to say, I heard this dreadful case the other day, have you ever heard of it? You've got the Times, the Daily Mail, the Spectator, and it goes on, the Financial Times, you name it, EU Reporter, European Voice, you name the journals, the material is there. That's the good news. But what needs to happen now is all that material needs to go viral.
Yes.
And it needs people right across the left, right across the right, left, right and up to cry out for justice. And at the end of the day, the goal has to be reform of the AW system. Of course we need to expedite criminals, but what that means is that British judges have to be able to look at evidence.
Will do. I put it on my website.
Again.
Friends of Alexander Adamescu. I can see there are young people in the room who've already got the link. I'm showing it to others. I'm not being ageist, I'm just watching a fascinating dynamic there. So it's wonderful. And I'm forever a sociologist. So
Edward Spaulding, Campaign for an Independent Britain. On Wednesday this week, we held a meeting in the House of Lords by arrangement with Lord Pearson of Rannoch on the compatibility or otherwise of alien law with British law. This aspect was discussed, and it was mentioned that when she was Home Secretary, Mrs May was quite okay about the idea of deploying the European gendarmerie over here if necessary for security purposes. And also it was said, and I haven't been able to verify it, that Amber Rudd is saying that we should maintain the European Arrest Warrant for the sake of security cooperation with other European countries after leaving the EU. So there is a danger here, and I think it's possibly in the Great Repeal Bill, And I would like to invite both or either of you gentlemen to come and talk to our public meeting on the 29th of April at the Royal Overseas League, when our members and others will
Thank you, Edward. Thank you, Edward. And the next question.
Percy Maddox, retired circuit judge. I've been outraged by the European Arrest Warrant, and I'm outraged by stories like this. I watched the debate when our then Home Secretary drove through the House of Commons the European Arrest Warrant, and it was only by permission of the Speaker that there was anything said against it. Have approaches been made to the present Prime Minister about the situation?
Yes, the Prime Minister has been written to. Ministers have been briefed. Politicians across both houses and left and right have been engaged on this matter. As you'll see on the website, there is a wealth of publicity and material, particularly national publicity, but yet the breakthrough has to be made. It takes time to effect change in politics, particularly when a Home Secretary and a Prime Minister are behind the curve. But, and I speak privately now, even though this will no doubt go out on video, my experience is, I believe what a 20th century economist said, when the facts change, I change my mind, what do you do? I think politicians have the capacity to change their mind, and I believe that when there's enough publicity, and when this moves from the highbrow publications it's being reported in, to places like the Express, the Mail, the Mirror, the Sun, etc., I think there will be electoral outrage and that change will be affected. But we're in a race against time. But I thank you for your comments, sir.
We're running extremely short of time, so a very quick question, if we may. Final question, and then we must break for the next.
Who is Alexander's Member of Parliament? And couldn't somebody try and get it raised at PMQ next Wednesday?
It's Talib Sadiq, in Hampstead Labour, and it's been very, very difficult to get her engaged on this because most of her constituent members are Remainers, and it is something that she hasn't considered to bring forth, unfortunately.
Surely somebody in this room must know a friendly MP who could get it raised.
There are a number of MPs who are supportive, really they are. What is so tragic in this instance, of course, by convention, any constituent of any political alignment should be reported and listened to by their Member of Parliament. And it's very sad that she has been contacted on so many occasions. We've met her, and unfortunately she's let her own views and ideology overcome a matter of what should be basic due process and rule of law.
But Tulip Sadiq is also handling the case of her constituent who has been illegally detained in Iran and is making a huge fuss about it. And I think you should go back to her and point out that this case is just as bad, it's the same as Mrs. Ratcliffe, I think it is, who is being detained, and she's got to be explained to that it's sheer hypocrisy to support one case as vigorously as she is doing and doing nothing on your case.
And if all of you and your friends can email her office on that basis, that will be very supportive, no doubt, to Mr. Adamescu.
It's a very good point, and I'm sure this will generate much discussion over dinner. I would thank Professor Evans and Alexander Adamescu. Please give them a warm thank you for their...